Deputy Mark McSharry for 10 minutes. Deputy.
Thanks very much, Laska Hirlock. And if I might say, it didn't take you long to make it into the top job there in the Centre Chair. You're doing a fantastic job. Glad to have an opportunity, Minister, to make a few points on this issue through you, Laska Corla. I think, being from the northwest of Ireland, from an area that's so dependent on agriculture for its survival, we have smaller holdings, longer winters, worse land, and we need more attention than most if we're to survive and continue to contribute to the output of this country. And obviously, in terms of agri-food, the beef sector is that which is most important, and our part of the country in the northwest is in fact the engine room for that beef production, where some 40% of the nation's weanlings are produced. To do that, we need to have targeted supports to ensure that people aren't dependent on having a working wife in a bank or a doctor or whatever it is, that aren't dependent on having a husband working somewhere else, to be able to supplement the income, to keep food production, to keep people on the land, and to preserve, after all, what is the tradition that helped build this nation into the many positive attributes that it has today. In that regard, there are a number of steps that need to be taken. And while I don't doubt the individual commitment of any minister in terms of wanting to support agriculture and family farming in this country, I think we need to be much more innovative in how we approach that if we're to be successful, if we're to ensure that people stay on the land. We've heard about, from many colleagues across the House, about the unworkability of many schemes that have been introduced over the years in terms of GLAS, in terms of genomics, and the other schemes, the bureaucracy, the administration that's involved, and the time and money that that costs farmers to put into it. It often seems that the focus is a lot more on compliance than facilitation and the application of common sense in trying to target necessary supports to assist production, to assist family farming, and assist the tradition that we have in this country of supporting the rural economy. I know, and again, colleagues have mentioned it, that when the mid-term CAP review comes up, that we would like to see any unspent money in the Rural Development Programme channeled specifically into the area of National Constraint Scheme. But again, the application of this scheme, to my mind and how it's done, is often to penalise people for having bad land, as opposed to supporting them in the difficulties that they're having and acknowledging the fact that they have constraints because their land isn't as good, because there are rushy areas, because there are areas of vulnerable water, and so on. And I think that we could do a good day's work to think how, in the application of common sense and fair compliance measures, that we can improve these schemes so that farmers, as the custodians of our environment and the rural environment, can best go about their business in food production and in continuing to do what made this country famous in terms of the exports of some 11 billion annually in food products. One of the issues that would be very close to my own heart is, again, going back to our over-focus on compliance. Now, that's not to say that I advocate non-compliance. Of course, it's important that we have rules, that we have regulations, and they're workable and manageable. But we must focus equally on market access. And I think we've been bad at that. Paddy Rogan used to be the main veterinary officer in the Department of Agriculture, and he had a reputation internationally of banging on doors, of getting doors opened for Irish produce. And while we've been good on spin and we've been good on press releases, I feel, as somebody who worked in the beef export business for a number of years, that Bord Bia, being among the best in the world at what they do, are better at marketing and selling Tullamore Dew or Ballymaloe relish than they are in terms of opening the markets to things like manufacturing beef from the animal. I mean, we all in the political world love to bash the processors, and God knows I'm going to do a little bit of that again in a moment myself. It's easy to bash them in isolation, but you can't do it without acknowledging in the first instance that almost 45% of the animal at the moment has been sold for less than €3 a kilo. A good 25% of the animal has been sold for less than €2 a kilo. And there are very limited markets for that sort of manufacturing beef. The Philippines, for example, was a buyer traditionally. That's packed to the hilt at the moment. There's some product going to South Africa because we're the goody two-shoes of Europe, bearing in mind our responsibilities with the Ukrainian crisis. We're not interested at the moment in exporting to Russia. though I'm told that France, Italy, Holland and Denmark have done bilateral deals to gain access for their what's called 90 VL and 70 VL product. And I think we need to be more proactive. If there are bilateral deals going on for the big boys, that Goody Two-Shoes isn't the rightful place of the Irish farming community. We want to have the ability to access that too. In the tradition of Paddy Rogan, frankly, when the new government takes place next week, as we all hope, I hope that there is a junior minister at a minimum and an assistant secretary at a minimum in the air full time. And I mean full time on manufacturing beef, on vacuum packed beef, on frozen beef to third countries and on live exports. Because I said, we're good at the spin, but we're not so good at opening doors. I'll give you an example. The number of BSE era restrictions on the import of Irish beef at the moment is prohibitive. This under 30 months rule, which is ridiculous in the extreme. I mean, Britain, for example, who arguably had a much more difficult and much more severe issue to do with CJD, or BSE rather, they have less prohibitive veterinary health certification at the moment to import to other countries. Whereas, countries like Oman, Saudi Arabia are now beginning to open, but it's a 30-month rule. And I would argue, that a time-restricted market, a 30-month restriction, that's not an open market at all. It doesn't suit our export market. It doesn't suit the grass finished animal, because you can't do it in 30 months. In addition, I think we need to focus very heavily on live exports. Egypt, to much fanfare, was opened, I think, before the election. I checked before I came in here. There wasn't one animal yet exported live to Egypt, not one. And I'm told that while we have a Department of Agriculture that's linked to the Department of the Marine, I'm reliably informed that that's to do with marine restrictions on boats coming in. For example, if there was a market for 1,500 animals to be exported to Egypt, that there are issues on the marine side and the technicalities and restrictions that have been placed on them, where I'm told there is a white flag standard being applied with regard to the export of live animals, and that's not been applied, for example, in terms of the transportation of humans. So, I think somewhere in the restrictions, we're losing sight of what we're trying to achieve. It's not a case of non-compliance. Of course, we want to be in line with the OIE, which is the Intergovernmental Agreement on the control of disease and so on, which we're all signed up to. We don't want to break any rules on that. But sometimes I'm bemused, again as somebody who's worked in the business, about why, instead of seeking to open markets, seeking to facilitate, seeking to spread our product far and wide, why at times we are our own worst enemies in the literal interpretation of rules, putting them into a practically unworkable situation. So again, back to an assistant secretary and a junior minister. I'd have them in the air full time. First priority, to have all BSE era restrictions throughout the world on veterinary health certification for Ireland lifted. They're unnecessary. Any market with those rules does not respect the fact that this is a BSE clear country, free country. Britain, as I said already, who had a more difficult problem in that regard than us, do not, and they have sought to proactively have those BSE restrictions lifted for themselves. And then, of course, on the live shipping side, again, from my own inquiries, I know that there's a market out there for in-calf heifers in the Moroccan market, for example, but we can't export them there. There's the marine issue I spoke of, but also there's a veterinary health certification issue. So I think we need to be much more proactive on this. And as somebody who's marketed and exhibited on the big world trade fairs at Anuga in Cologne and every other year at Cial in Paris, it's easy sell Tullamore Dew and Ballymaloo relish, with the best of respects to those types of product. It's more difficult to sell the less sexier tens of thousands of tons of manufacturing beef that ultimately is what's going to maintain a reasonable price here. Another issue, I have a minute left, I think, so just on another issue, under Article 39b of the EU Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, it states that farmers are entitled to a fair price for their produce, except there are no regulations underpinning the enforcement of that. And what we have, whether it's supermarket multiples through processors dictating weight limits and so on for farmers, that's having a very negative impact on prices for farmers. It's wrong, it's unfair, it's anti-competition, and we should be lobbying in a European context to have regulations put in place to pin Article 39B of the treaty so that farmers can have fair treatment. Very finally, TTIP, Mercosur, CETA. There is the potential here, as much as it attracts us to opening wider markets for other Irish products. We must be very, very careful. I'll use Mercosur as one example just in conclusion. What's proposed there is a 78,000 tonne with a tariff of 7.5% to come in here. If that's steak meat alone, I'm just finishing up, that would mean that 30%, 8 billion's worth of the beef, the steak beef market in Europe would be gone. That would wipe out this country. So, Minister, be very careful, and whatever you take up in the new administration, make sure whoever's Minister for Agriculture takes those few points on board. Thank you.
Deputy.